Here at the Broad Street today, members of Tynwald have been briefed about the waiting times at the hospital. With me, the man who's been making that presentation, Iain. It's very emotive, this, isn't it? I mean, the perception is we have got waiting times here that are probably longer than the UK.
We have got waiting lists that are longer than in the UK, and obviously that distresses people. Somebody with a GP background, I'm well aware that how much problem it causes. The reality is that we've got long waiting lists here in comparison with the UK because they have invested huge sums of money in their waiting list time.
We have this great new hospital that was meant to be, you know, the place where we were going to sort all our problems out and people be through. In fact, we'll be doing sort of health tourism. This is not the case.
It's not the case, but it's not the hospital's fault either. Basically, the difficulty is that we're an island. We end up seeing lots of patients, for example, as follow-ups, who in England would not be being seen at their local hospital. And that means, in turn, there isn't the capacity to bring in new patients. Our consultant staff are working at almost exactly the same rate as you would expect them to do if they're working in England. The reality is that we just don't have the capacity to keep up at the moment.
And yet you've mentioned that you've got a whole area, that hospital, one theatre that isn't even utilised at the moment.
Yep, there is a sixth theatre that in theory could be opened up. It would cost about £1 million a year to staff that, just simply in terms of the nurses and the operating department assistant required to make the theatre work. The trouble is that at the present moment, there isn't £1 million available, and even if there was, there are a whole variety of competing priorities that million could be spent on. So the reality is, unless somebody comes along with a dedicated £1 million, it's very difficult to see how that theatre can be opened up on a regular basis.
How bad are the waiting times in the Isle of Man?
Overall, they're actually not too bad. We've looked at, for outpatient wait, for most specialties, the waiting time is between 3 and 4 months. There are about 3 or 4 where it is between 4 and 6 months. But we recognise significant problems in certain areas, classically dermatology, where the waiting lists are very, very considerably longer than anybody would want them to be.
In the past, it's been the quick fix, bring somebody in, they do a whole lot of cataracts, for instance. I remember a few years ago, that was a big problem, and that they get rid of the waiting lists overnight. Is that the way forward? These short, sharp ways to reduce certain waiting lists, or are you looking for an overall plan?
In general, it's not the way to do it, because the underlying problem's still there, and you end up with the waiting list building back up again. There is no doubt that certain specialties, again, dermatology is the obvious one, the waiting list initiative, in addition to sorting out the underlying problem, would be worth doing. But it has to be in addition to sorting out the underlying problem.
People watching this who have gone through the early process, they've been to the doctors, they've got a problem, they're worried about it, and they want to be seen, they can be waiting months. This must be terrible for those sort of people to deal with that. These are people who have been paying into their funds all their years and now expecting to be looked after, and you're failing.
I think it's fair to say that anybody that has what appears to be a life-threatening or urgent problem is not put on a routine waiting list. They are dealt with urgently, depending on their clinical priority. But those patients with, say, suspected cancers are seen within 2 weeks. So really what we're talking about is people who are on a routine waiting list for a condition that may well be unpleasant or distressing, but fortunately is not likely to be life-threatening. And yet it's not desirable, but it is the reality that there is a waiting list everywhere. England is better than us, but England still has a waiting list.
And what's it in the UK? It's 18 weeks, isn't it? They set themselves a target. Have you actually set yourself a target here?
We haven't set a target. That target was politically set in England. It was the politicians that came up with the 18-week target. It's not one that was clinically derived. What we have done is asked our clinicians, our consultants, what for their specialty would be a reasonable waiting time for routine outpatient appointment. And the answers come back with virtually the same for every specialty at a maximum of 3 to 4 months. And it's fair to say that about 60% of our specialties we already achieved that. Another 20% were very close to achieving it. It's that final 20% that is the difficult area.
And what level would you be happy at?
I think the shorter the better would be the obvious answer. The reality is that if we can tackle those specialties where there are extremely long waiting lists and bring them down to within that 3 to 4 month period, that would be a good result for everybody.